for 10 best practices for translating government websites, and I have to be complete and full disclosure, there are more than 10. I'm sorry, it's 10 plus best practices for government websites. So I am the founder and principal consultant for EBSXL. I mostly work with governments, state and local, that sort of thing. I'm a Portlander, Portland, Oregon. Since we are on the East Coast, I guess I have to clarify there. I'm very outdoorsy. I've been on Drupal.org for 19 plus years. If you know my secret username, on Drupal.org, I work through joshuami. That's my username that I typically use. But my secret username is Mobile Hippie. It just didn't feel very professional to use once I became a government worker. Oh, and that was me with my hair down. So to my translation journey, I've worked on a lot of translation sites, which is interesting because it's almost, I won't say exclusively in government, but it's almost always at a really large scale. So I've worked with Multnomah County Library and also Multnomah County as their applications manager for several years. And a lot of our projects, we did large-scale translation, particularly Multnomah County Library. I'll show an example later. For those of you that don't know, on Drupal.org, from 2014 to 2016, I was the CTO of the Drupal Association and kind of built up the first tech team for the Drupal Association. So some of the translation work that we did as it relates to more of providing the tools to let the community translate aspects of Drupal than the translation itself. I've worked on Johnson & Johnson's global brand platform, specifically helping implement a technique called hreflang, and I'll talk about that briefly, but it typically isn't going to apply to government websites that you have to implement full hreflang, but I'll talk what it is and how you can kind of use it to provide metadata to search engines. I've also worked with the city of Portland, Oregon, where we did a massive effort to provide translation into 10 safe harbor languages, and so they're basically able to turn any of their content into translated content really quickly. And I'm working with Washington County, Oregon right now. We're going to be doing a translation project very soon to step away from using a modified version of the Google Translate widget, which I'll talk a little bit about why you don't necessarily want to use that a little bit later on. And I've done a lot more, but that's a few of the areas that are kind of like that deep translation space, so that you know why you can kind of trust me on some of this. So I'm going to just jump right into this top 10 countdown. Number 10. First of all, whenever you're doing translation, you got to start with knowing your audience. And I usually, before you even get started in looking at analytics of how many of your translated pages are being clicked, you don't have translated pages yet, right? Because you're implementing it. So you first have to look at, well, what languages are the people coming to my website using on their operating systems? And so when you see the top language by users in Google Analytics, what it's actually telling you is what the browser has set as its default language, which you can change at the browser level, you can change at the system level, but it's giving you a sense of people are visiting the site. Now, I'll be honest with you, this can be a little bit deceptive in terms of what your real metrics are, because it is often influenced a little bit by bots and other crawlers that are hitting your site from other areas, other parts of the world. And some of your worst actors, whenever it comes to scraping your site, are often going to be from, China, Russia, all these other places where it may not be legitimate traffic. They're just trying to, look for vulnerabilities and other things. So you want to work with your sysadmins and your teams that are setting up stuff. Make sure you have the right levels of filtering on your site so you're getting as good a picture of what are the people to this site that are coming to this site actually using. So number 9. This is probably one of my biggest pet peeves and one I will probably dwell on the longest in terms of what we talk through here. You need to avoid the client-side crutch whenever you're doing translations for your site. Now, what I mean by that is that a lot of people who have implemented translation at the government level have implemented what's called the Google Translate widget. And you may be familiar with it. It tends to add that little bit of code to the top of the page that has the word Google in it, has the translated to this language from this language. If you're using the actual JavaScript widget, it doesn't even show you that much. It just shows you that you changed the language, and you'll notice that the URL has changed in some cases, but in other cases you won't even see that because it's actually happening all at the JavaScript layer. It's not even changing the page path. Now, the problem that I see is this is Legion. It's all over different government websites. So that first one I showed was an example from actually, where was it from? Yeah, Seattle. The second one here, this is Vancouver, British Columbia. And you can see it doesn't quite look the same, but whenever you kind of dig into it, you can see that there's still this little translate button. And if I take it to the next step, it's actually going to do the same thing. It's going to swap the URL and telling me that I'm using translate.google.com. And the worst part of this one is when you look at the button that they give people, the button itself, the selector is only in English. So if I'm a non-English speaker coming to this site, I have to know the word choose a language, and I have to have enough context to pick from one of those languages and hit translate. And that's a really tough starting point whenever you're thinking about that experience for translation users. And I see it all over the place. Here's Oregon.gov. Here's LA City. This one was interesting too because you have this little modal pop-up. So not only do we have like this equity and translation issue, but we likely have an accessibility issue as well, right? We've got this kind of weird experience that's probably not even announcing itself correctly from a rich internet application standpoint. Here we go at Seattle. Seattle was interesting because whenever I did this talk for the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit last fall, Seattle didn't even have translation on their site. And part of me was like, oh, that's a shame. And then the other part of me was like, you know what? They didn't use the client-side crutch. If you're not going to provide real translation, just don't even say you're translating your site. Because the reality is if you're using a modern browser has the option to translate any site, right? I can go into Chrome and say, as a matter of fact, if my language is set to Spanish in my instance of Google Chrome and I go to a page, it's going to ask me, hey, do you want to translate this to Spanish? Or vice versa, if you have yours set to English and you go to a Spanish page. So in the case of Washington.gov, I was like, hey, that's actually not a bad way to do it because you're at least being kind of honest to your visitors, right? Well, I'm happy to say that they have actually switched and they are providing real translation now. So this was kind of an exciting thing for me to see reviewing it for this slideshow that they've made that progress over the last year. So avoiding the client-side crutch, we're not going to provide it on the client. And incidentally, one more thing for providing it on the client side. The biggest reason not to do that is it gives a false sense of security to your decision makers, your elected officials, your department heads, that you are making things equitable. But the reality is none of that client-side translation gets indexed by any of the search engines. So if I speak that language and I go to search, I am not going to find your content. And that is such a shame when we're talking about government services where it's often critical to provide those services from an equity standpoint. And I know equity is an out word right now, but I'm going to use it anyway because I kind of disagree with that point of view. Thank you. So number 8 in best practices, you're actually going to do real translation now. So one of the key things that you need to get in place before you even put the technology in place is who's going to be reviewing these translations. And it needs to be a human, whether you're using machine translation from a service like the Google Translate API, or whether you're going to an agency that specializes in translation and they pass translation files, often called POT files or POTX, that they pass those back and forth to a translator who's bilingual who actually does the translation for you. You need to have that bilingual person looking at your content to verify that your translations are good. That doesn't mean they will always be the best option. I actually have a really good case study from working with the city of Portland. We hired an agency to translate our interface, which is aspects of the site like your search button or the home button in your breadcrumbs, maybe the filter or facet labels in your search interface, that sort of thing. We wanted all of that to be fully translated into all of our target languages, so we sent it out to this agency, and they gave us back the files that we would be able to use to import into Drupal's translation management engine. And at the same time, we were like, let's see how good they are. Let's compare this to the Google Translate API, and so we spent the money to set up the Google Translate API, did the same process with it where we sent it the exact same files that were essentially sent to the agency, came back and we compared the two, and we were fortunate enough to have bilingual speakers on the team for Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese, and we were able to compare what was actually done in the translation cases. All three languages, our bilingual speakers actually preferred Google Translate API's interface translation. And that is probably because Google's Translate API is biased a little bit towards technology, so it's biased towards that idea of creating translations for applications. And so little things like the word for search may have been kind of the wrong word for search in the context of the human translator, because they're used to translating documents which have all this context rather than interface language. So it's an important part of that, reviewing translation with humans, is it also has to be reviewed within the context of your website. And your interface context is going to be very different than your content context, if you will. Number 7 on the list, help search engines out. Give them a helping hand. We're going to give them some meta tags. I love meta tags. Those things that nobody can see and even fewer understand. Okay, so let's start with the simple one. Every HTML document has an HTML tag that represents, or element, if you want to be, semantically correct. The HTML element has attributes applied to it. So in this case, we have an attribute for lang. We have an attribute for dir, which is short for direction. And what it's telling us is that this HTML document is in the language of English. And by the way, the fact that it says -us, this is part of that href-lang thing I was talking about earlier, which is a very Google-specific thing. But what it's saying is it's the English spoken in the United States, which is different, by the way, than the English spoken in the UK or the English spoken in Canada. You know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I had to lay it on you. So in all of those English languages, obviously, the direction of the text is LTR, which stands for left to right. If I had a language like, say, Arabic or Hebrew, it would be RTL, because it is right to left. And the cool thing about that dir tag on HTML is it actually is used by some design systems out there to determine the language your font is going to be presented as well. So it can actually be used for CSS and some other things in order to do layouts and whatnot. But those are kind of critical, like, base tags that exist in the document itself. That's not necessarily a meta tag, that's the HTML tag. The meta tags might look something like this. So this is an example from the city of Portland for paying a water bill. You'll notice that we've got some geotags in there talking about place name, which actually helps search engines know, oh, okay, this page is in this language, but it's for this place, so if I'm searching for this and I'm in this region, I might want to return this page in that language. You'll notice also that it has this link relation canonical, and that's basically saying, this is the official path for this piece of content. This is where you can go find this every single time. There is a concept, though, called the language alternate. Oh, I'm sorry, there were people taking photos. I'm going to put it back up because I want it to get its glorious moment of meta tag notoriety. All right, here we go. So now we're looking at the relationship of alternate. And basically what this is saying is my canonical was English, my alternate is all of these. And this is an extreme example. I was talking about the Johnson & Johnson global brand platform. This is an example of the Clean and Clear brand, right? So you've got all the different sites that exist for Clean and Clear at different URLs in those different regions. And that href-lang tag that's actually saying, hey, this is the alternate for this in that region, helps boost the search engine optimization across all those different regions. So if the English page is really popular, it gives a little bit of a boost to it in another language if that's being translated or searched for in that translated language. So that's that kind of href-lang and the alternates. For most of you, the alternates, if you're looking at a government site, you're not necessarily going to have all the different regions, right? You're going to have US on all those because your thing is targeted for your state, local, federal site. But you will still have the alternate listed for what the page is. And likewise, if I'm on the Spanish page, it's going to be the canonical one, and my alternate will be the English page, if that makes sense. So all these pages have to work together. And I got to show this off because it's kind of cool technologically. And so for any of you geeks in the room who really like dig on this thing, the way this actually worked wasn't specifically Drupal, because Drupal does hreflang pretty well if it's for a single site, single region. But if you're looking at multiple regions, these are all separate Drupal instances actually hosted in that region. So in this case, Acquia servers sitting in Asia Pacific versus Acquia servers sitting in the East Coast. And basically the way it was all set up is all the individual brand sites had an API key where they called back to a central Lambda service that says, hey, I'm part of this group, I have this key for this page, add me to the alternates, and then it would store it to a DynamoDB table. And then all those sites, whenever you were hooking them all together, if you assign them all one of those alternates, it would do the mapping to then map the 20 alternates, which is kind of cool. But I'd probably overkill for most government websites. I just like showing it off because it was fun to work on. So number 6, we've got our meta tags in place. We're not relying on the client-side crutch. So now here's the other aspect of not relying on the client-side crutch. You all have search engines on your websites, right? People can go to your website, they can go up to the search bar, and they can hit search. What happens if they search in their language? What do they get? So not only do you not use the client-side crutch because of your search engines out there, the Googles, the Bings, the DuckDuckGos, you're doing it because of your personal site search, right? If you're using Solr or Elasticsearch, you need actual content in your database that is indexed in that language. And this also applies to a lot of the AI stuff, right? If you're applying an AI chatbot or something like that, you are actually probably using your search engine index to feed the learning of that AI model, right? And then it's able to respond with results in that language. So it's really critical that you index in that language. And this is what it can look like. This is an example of a search page on portland.gov, which you can get to from any Spanish page on the site. If you click the search bar, it's actually going to pull up Spanish search. And all of the content that you get in that particular search is going to be in that language. All of the facets or filters that you have in that search will be in that language. And I will say this is a combination of 2 aspects of what's in Drupal core. You've got translate of content, right? So you've got content and language there, and that's what allows you to have each of those search results. And then you have translate of interface, which actually, basically what it does is it translates all the strings of your site. So like the little labels for different parts. So if I'm thinking about pagar mi factura de agua, and I apologize for my pronunciation, I am not bilingual in Spanish. My wife and daughter are. It's kind of awesome to hear them talk back and forth. So in this case, that is actually, a string that is picked up in the interface translation within Drupal. So it's a little bit different part of the configuration. You need both of them for the entire site to work together. All right, so number 5, I've got my content into the system in the correct language. I'm able to search for it. Now, since we're not relying on that client-side crutch and we don't have the little translate icon that not everybody knows what it means, or the translate word, not everybody knows what it means, we need to make it clear what languages our site supports. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. The simplest, and Multnomah County Library did this, I want to say we launched this back in like 2010. It doesn't look the same as what it looks in 2010. This is a newer screenshot. But you'll notice that on the top of every page of the site, you have this little translation bar with what they call their pillar languages, I believe, is what they call them. So you've got 5 languages there, English plus Spanish, Chinese, Russian, and Vietnamese. And they do a really good job of translating a lot of their different bits of content into those various languages. Now, one thing to note is when you're doing this type of translation, in the case of Multnomah County, I like one of the things they do is if you're on a page that they haven't translated to your language, and a good example of this would be if you have a computer skills class being offered by a library for Chinese speakers. It was translated into Chinese because the target audience is Chinese. I probably don't need to translate it to Spanish as well to tell them that there's this Chinese class available, because it's just not the target audience, right? So in that particular case, it would be kind of grayed out, or it would be showing as disabled because we don't actually have a translation for it in that particular case. So that's a good way of giving the context of this page is available in these languages. And you'll notice I'm using the actual language label in the translated language. So I'm not using Spanish, I'm using Espanol because I want to show people that I actually speak their language rather than giving them the English word to guess at. Here's another way it can be done, which I really like from how the city of Portland did it. Instead of doing it as kind of a global switcher, they did it embedded in the page. So as you get to a section of the page, it actually says translate this page, and it provides the languages it's available in. Additionally, and this is one of my personal favorites, is they provide a translations menu that gives you the entire title of the content in that language. So instead of someone having to target on the page a single word in their language, they're actually given the thing they were looking for in their language, right? They're given the full title of that. And so it gives that little bit of extra context. It does busy up the page a little bit, so you need to weigh the usability concerns to the equity concerns here. But we found, especially in this case where we were really trying to target some key content to make it clear that we had it in the other languages, providing that extra translated title is pretty cool. And both of those, by the way, are just simple views that are created in Drupal. They're not any like special module or anything like that. Literally 2 different view blocks placed on the page. And this page in question, I think, was using a basic layout builder sort of situation. Okay, so I'm going to give a 5 bonus because I mentioned layout builder, and this bonus actually came out of some conversations that I've had this week with folks here at the con. Oh, no, this is not the one that came from this week. This was actually my bonus that I added a while back, so scratch that. I forgot what the next slide was. Here's another cool way that you can do translations that I implemented a couple different places now. And this is specific to translated media. So as many of you know, in Drupal, you have media that's available, you have images, you have video, you have documents. How you store those documents, how you make sure you have translations for those documents is different in different organizations. I know some organizations just put all their media in as, here's my English version, here's my Spanish version, here's my Chinese version, whatever that combination is, right? Each document is its own media ID, its own completely separate thing. A way I have implemented it in a couple places now to help manage translations a bit better is to say, just like content, media can be translatable. And so you can say, add a Spanish translation to my English document. And then when you embed it on the English page, you can show translations as an option in a display mode. So in this particular example, we've got residential service rates, but maybe on that English page, we actually want to show, yeah, we've got this document translated in these other ways. On the back end, in the Manage Media view, all your translations are tied to each other. So they're all kind of tied off that translate thing. That's really powerful whenever you're trying to dig through translations because, let's face it, most of your editors speak one language, right? And so if you can give them the English one and say, just add the translation of this PDF or whatever to the appropriate English document, and it will automatically display in all the right places, that's a really powerful way to do document media translations. It also works pretty nice for image translations, because a lot of times you will find yourself with an image that maybe you have some contextual translations where you have a slightly different version of the image on an English page than you have on a Spanish page. Just the same, you can have an image media item and it can have 2 different files associated with the 2 different translations in the actual database. So powerful way to kind of organize translations, keep everything nice and clean and easy to update. Number 4. No, this one really is number 4, don't worry. So one of the aspects of translation that is really important is actually thinking about tone, word length, cultural expectations. You want to have all of that incorporated into your design. So I'm going to use this example from Clean and Clear because this is actually an Arabic site. You'll notice a few things that just kind of jump out in a right to left language. Where's the branding on the site? It's in the top right. The order of the menu actually starts right to left. It doesn't start left to right. Fun story about translating to Arabic. I was working with some folks at, I'm not going to call out who they were, but I will say where it was. It was at City of Portland, and they were doing their darndest. They went in and they translated on the Arabic page all of their phone numbers. And they reversed the order of every phone number. For any of you who know how Arabic languages work, they are a right-to-left language, but they read numbers left to right still. So they're still using Roman numerals. Every single one of those phone numbers was going to who knows where. Yeah.
Arabic numerals.
Oh, that's true. Arabic numerals. Thank you. I should correct myself there. But yeah, so it's a really good example of our best intentions. You need some experts working with the content editors, checking their work, that sort of thing. And in this particular case, they've done all this work to be kind of culturally appropriate for the audience that they're shooting for. This was the bonus that I was talking about from talking at the conference. So we talked a little bit about it being laid out in Layout Builder, or you might be using paragraphs. Soon we're going to have Experience Builder, right? We have all of these page building techniques that we love to give our editors because no one loves messing around with how a page looks more than somebody trying to impress their boss. And the problem is complexity kills. Complex layouts. When we give people the ability to say, I want a grid of 12 cards, and they can be anything. That grid of 12 cards then has to be translated. And if you do that as paragraphs, that's 12 entities being grouped inside an entity that's being placed on an entity, and that entire structure has to be translated. Oh, and by the way, those are all revisions, which means that all counts against your revisions table, which means your entire system is getting heavier and heavier and more complex. Depending on how you design your accordion, it's the same thing, right? It's any of these paragraph types that we're trying to protect people from doing it wrong, when the reality is if we had just used simple semantic headings, a couple of lists, maybe an embedded piece of media or two, it would have been much, much easier to translate in a simple CK editor field.
We banned accordions.
Thank you. Ban accordions. I want to get a T-shirt that said that. Another one out there, by the way. I told somebody about this the other day, and I love broadcasting this loud and clear. Let's all kill carousels. Yes. I hate carousels. Should I use a carousel.com? Please visit it. It's a carousel telling you all the reasons why you should never use them. It's got all the stats and stuff. And I use it with everybody I'm trying to convince not to use a carousel because it's a really effective way to deliver the message. But I'm saying this not to say that we can't make exciting, well laid out pages, but as we're creating government services, your visual design doesn't matter if you're trying to translate it, if you're trying to make it simple, if you're trying to keep it usable, if you're trying to keep it accessible. So let's scale it back a little bit. Let's do simpler pages that we can deliver more accessibly, cut out some of the extra. Think about that for a bit. All right, so number 3, and we're right on schedule here. Avoid mixed translation. I'm about to show you something that may be frightening. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. Public services announcement, right? Okay, get ready for this. Read this headline. I am in so much pain. I mean, not the least of it being that, it's a fairly complex English headline, right? But now I've made it even more complicated by adding a second language. And this is not to call out my friends at Washington County. There's some great people there. But we did work with them on this to actually create a translation of the news item. They have a translation system so they can sit side by side. The translate menu shows that there's this second piece. They didn't need to cram it together into one. And by the way, I've actually seen one like this for another client where not only had they done it with the title, but they also had an image with text in it that had both languages in the image with text. So it was like, wow, you've hit all the bingo buttons. Woo! So yeah, let's avoid this. When you have a page, and this is a really heinous example of a headline, but this could exist anywhere in the page, right? We have a tendency to drop a little translation in the middle of the page thinking, oh, well, that'll help that person who speaks that other language. And let's face it, it's often, especially in the US, it's often Spanish. We often tend to drop that in the middle of the page and like, oh, hey, we covered it, great, equity, woohoo! So that's not the right way to do it though. Like it's better to give a fully translated page with all the rest of the context than it is to just kind of cram it into this other situation. That's not to say there aren't times when you need to drop some mixed translation into a page. Maybe it's that navigation we were just looking at, right? That's mixed translation. But we should avoid it with kind of the critical content and make it clear that there's a translated version of this, rather than trying to cram it all into one document. Can you imagine what this would look like if it were 4 or 5 languages? I mean, actually Drupal wouldn't even create the full URL because the title would, exceed URL parameters. All right, number 2. We're getting there. We're really close. Okay. So speaking of simplifying things, there is a way to reduce translation costs. And the fastest way to reduce translation costs is to translate fewer words. I like giving this example because it was a good example of using, and by the way, there's a great, somebody did a demo of doing this sort of, make the language similar. It was Matthew Saunders and Bree Banesh and the AI session that they did for Amazy AI. It was a really good example of having this kind of like integrated into the site where it just automatically took this postdoctorate thing about the economic effectiveness of tariffs and like simplified it down into simple words. Spoiler alert, they're not great, but that's me. So postgraduate versus 8th grade. If I'm looking at those 2 versions right there, the immediate thing you notice is I'm spending half as much money per word. So like the Google Translate API is an example. If I'm using machine translation through that service, it actually charges you a cost per word. Now it's a really crazy cost. I'm going to say it's like like 1 million words for $10 or something like that. It's the numbers on it are kind of astronomical to wrap your head around. But I'll tell you, as someone who's used it on a site like the City of Portland, you can start eating up those credits pretty darn quick if you generate enough content. So as we're generating content, let's help out our English speakers too and simplify it down into plain language. It's just going to make everything else easier. Last one, number 1. Okay, so I don't have any like special slide for this. This is just more of a heartfelt this is how I feel about translation as it exists on government sites. You are not going to be perfect. I work with clients all the time who say, I just don't have the budget to implement translation right now. I can't get human reviewers. It's just not possible this year, maybe next year. Can we do this in the meantime? The meantime, take those incremental steps. If you can't do full translation, translate the services you know people are going to in another language. Look at your Google Analytics and say, we know people are hitting this page regularly in Spanish because they need that content in Spanish. We know people are hitting this page regularly in Ukraine or Russian. Translate that page into that language. Use a little bit of that time on analytics to determine what your highest value is for delivering that service. It's just a matter of striving to be better. Just keep working at it. And then hopefully you will get the budget at some point to do that full translation service, and we can do so much more to make it bigger and better. Maybe not bigger, right-sized and better, so that people are able to get the services that they need. I lied. It wasn't the last one. I have a bonus. I had another bonus. And actually, this is one that has been in my slide deck for a while, but I think it's about time to get curious about AI translation. It's not 100% there yet, but it is getting so much better. And one of the things that I find interesting about it, by the way, this is looking at Drupal CMS with AI enabled and AI translate enabled, and it gives you a little translate using AI if you've configured it all correctly, which is not trivial, but it's not too bad. It will give you some basic translations, and I've heard some of them are really good. I was just talking to Michael out at the booth the other day, and he was saying, yeah, the stuff that they produce in German, like nobody would ever say that in German in that way. Like that particular language, they're not good at. it's grammatically correct, just no one would talk that way. It seems strange. So AI is not perfect. I think there are going to be more and more models that are trained specifically for translation, and I'm excited to test a lot of those over the next year because I think they're gradually going to replace that Google Translate API or Microsoft's Bing Translate, services, those types of things. By the way, this looks very similar to what it looks like if you've enabled translation management as well, with the exception of it gives you some feedback saying, oh, hey, I've got some changes on the English version of the page. I need to create a new translation for Spanish and for Russian or something like that, which can be really valuable if you're managing a lot of languages and you're trying to keep up with all of those. One of the things that makes AI translation extra cool is that you can give it a prompt to give it context of why is it translating. So remember earlier when I was talking about like designing for culture and tone and all these other things in that space, you're really trying to hit something the right way. You can do the same thing now with the words, but from feeding it into, like, here's all this context, and by the way, I want you to use the following context when you translate. And I think it also opens up, in addition to translation, the ability to kind of proofread content for, did I use the following words in the right way? And that could even be English words that you've provided context into your system that says, hey, if I use this word, make sure it's used in this context so that people actually understand what I'm talking about. And that can be something really technical maybe that is a part of a permitting process, or it could be something that's about access and like the common words that people use to access a particular thing. So that was my final bonus item there. I did mention quite a few modules and whatnot in this session. Obviously, there's a lot built into core. I mentioned configuration translation, content translation, interface translation, language, all of those getting set up. Meta tag, which is a module that you can install that basically gives you all those rich meta tag titles up there. You do have to do a bit of configuration with that to make sure that it's pulling in the right stuff. Though there's some really great recipes built into Drupal CMS that if you just use those recipes for a lot of the SEO stuff, you're going to get a lot of this out of the box. hreflang, I mentioned that project. The particular instance I was showing was like a completely custom instance, but this version of hreflang that I'm referring to here works with the meta tag module to do all of that canonical relationships and things. I mentioned translation management tool, which has one of the best Drupal project acronyms ever. It's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think it every single time I see TMGMT. And then, of course, Drupal AI and that suite of modules being kind of important to that last bit there. So I like leaving time for questions because what I found is this particular presentation gives forth a lot of questions. So I will say thank you. That's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. And I'm going to open it up to all of you. I will repeat your question for the microphone to make sure that it gets onto the recording, but let me have it. Right there, and then right there, and then right there.
Can you talk a little more about the Drupal translation management tool?
Yeah, so translation management, basically what it is a tool is it says, so just Drupal at core has the different languages and then the ability to add and edit translations from the Translate tab. Translation management adds another layer that says, are my translations up to date? Which what it does is it keeps track of the revisions so that if your English page, which usually, let's face it, we start with the English translation page changing first. So the English page changes, it immediately makes the revisions for all the other languages out of date. And it says these are out of date. That way, if I'm looking at the Translate tab for a piece of content, I know, oh, I need to update these translations. And I might not be able to get to it right away, but at least I know this stuff is out of date. And you can create reports using views that say, here's all my outdated content on my site that I need to make sure I get up to date. It also has some abilities to integrate with APIs. So earlier, whenever I was talking about the Google Translate API, if you hook up the Google's Translate API, you go get a developer key, you plop it into the system, and by the way, you can get a lot out of it for free. So if you just want to test it and you have the ability to sign up for a Google developer key for Translate API, you can do an awful lot of translation for free. But if you hook that into the Translate API, it will actually give you the ability to say, I want this entire batch of content to go to the Translate API, give me back a draft, and I'll have a draft sitting there for me to review, which can be a really powerful workflow, and actually one that I would kind of recommend for the time that we're in right now. A lot of people talk about going to a translation agency and having them do the translation first. But if you do the Translate API first, whichever one you choose to use, I use the Google Translate API because I like it. It works well for my purposes, but there's several others out there that you can look at, and there's a list of them in the translation management module as to what it can integrate with. But if you batch translate those things and bring it back as a draft, then you can have your agency just review the draft, and then you're looking at, roles and permissions to maybe allow someone in the agency to come in and say, yeah, this all looks good. And then maybe you have a workflow state that says translation approved, and then you have somebody on your staff that actually does the publishing. Like, there's all these cool things you can do when you combine translate management with maybe a little bit of workflow and an API. So really powerful tool. A little bit to set up. So you're probably like, you want somebody to teach your developers how to do it the first time maybe, but it's once you've done it once, using it again on other projects is pretty straightforward. Okay, and yeah, no problem.
Question, in terms of handling media, is it the translation management module that also handles that? And does the media translation work in CPA?
Okay, so there were several bits to that question, so I'm going to try to repeat it, make it everything there. You said in regards to translation management module, does it handle media? And if translated media is embedded, does CK Editor handle it? Okay. First part of that, translation management module and media. I probably would not use the translation management module for media per se. You could use it for saying, I changed the English version and now my other versions are out of date, so it would work for that part. But because media, so translated content, you have text that has gone through some system, and then you can look at a diff and you can say, oh, this is how it's changed. For media, you can't really look at a diff of like a PDF or an image or whatnot, so you're probably just uploading a new version. So you might use it for tracking it, but you're not going to be able to pass it off to an API and say, here, translate my PDF. It won't be able to do that. As for does media that's been embedded into CK Editor, particularly CK Editor 5, which we should all be using now, if you're still on CK Editor 4 and need help, give me a holler. I've done a couple of really hairy migrations there. But if you're embedding it into CK Editor 5, there's a few things there. What I usually do is create some display modes, and then I do some twig template magic to actually expose the translation of media within CK Editor 5. Because media in CK Editor 5, really the only thing you can do with it is add it, change its display mode, maybe change its alignment, and delete it, and that's it. But with a little bit of tweaking of the twig templates on the back end, you can actually expose like an edit link or a translate link to people who have the permission to do that. And if you do that, you absolutely can kind of like translate it through that UI. And actually even translate it through the display, like it's displaying as full content embedded in a page. While logged in, you could see that edit link or that translate link. And I found, like the example I was showing earlier with the document translation, you may have noticed that it had like a little edit link next to it as well. And that's because I was logged in looking at it, and you could click on that edit link and actually edit the document. That's not in core. That's like something that I've tended to do with a lot of my projects, but it's not like a huge lift. It's kind of a cool way to approach it, because CK Editor is really rudimentary in its media handling out of the box. Cool. Up front, I believe, sir, did you have your hand up? Oh, maybe not. Okay. I'm going to go there, I think.
Okay, question, because you showed the model of 4 different Drupals. If I have one Drupal and I'm looking at translation, how does that work with, like, let's say meta tags? Like if my editor's putting in description in English, will it translate, like, will it automatically translate if we're using a tool that does that, or do we need to provide a second set of meta tags, like a Spanish field? And then also the second part of this is similar, is same thing with like alt tags. Are there accessibility issues that we need to consider?
Great question. Okay, so I'm going to try to repeat that a little
Yeah.
bit here. So there was an example up on there which had like the giant list of hreflang tags. Very complex, right? So that's multiple Drupal sites, not one Drupal site with all the translation
Okay.
set up on it, right? If you're on a single Drupal site and you have translation set up, every single field on your entity is translatable. So your title field is translatable, your summary field is translatable, your body field is translatable. If you have a meta description field, that can be translatable. So all of those would feed into tokens that you would load into meta tag, and then per language, it would actually display the translated token.
Okay.
So like your meta tag description as an example, it will absolutely pull the Spanish description so long as you've configured it to know, oh, this field, which is translatable, pull in this token, and it'll do the rest for you. It's pretty cool. There was a second
Alt
question.
tags.
Alt tags,
Accessibility.
yes. Alt tags and accessibility, which actually ties back to the media question earlier and translating media. So even in the example earlier I gave of images, and you might want to translate images for context, I actually forgot that, alt text. That is the part of translation that's really nice to translate on media, particularly images, is alt text, or if you have captioning of some sort, like a default caption field that you're feeding into your templates. You can definitely set those up for translation, and they would be on that same translate tab, and that is kind of a key part of accessible translation of media, because all the elements in HTML is the same if you're doing accessibility, but you still need to translate the content itself, and that's an important bit of it. So I went from there to there.
I was just had a quick question when you were talking about simplifying down to 8th grade. Like in my agency now, we went from 8th grade to 5th grade, which is maybe more of a challenge. Do you know of any tools that Drupal has, or any tools that run through that?
Yeah, actually, there was a great presentation, the one I mentioned from Matthew and Bree earlier today. They actually touched on actually using AI to do that as part of the CK editor experience. So it's like becomes a little button in CK editor, do this, and it runs through it. There are also tools like Grammarly and Hemingway app, which doesn't even integrate with it, that can integrate with that. Those are kind of the starting points. If your organization just doesn't want to buy any of those, Microsoft Word actually has some reading level stuff built into it as well, which is another possibility. And before I will totally take another question, but I also realize we're officially over time. It's 2:03. So thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. I will stick around for a few minutes to continue that.
Make the slides available, or could we just?
Actually, I should have mentioned my blog. This is a blog post on my blog. So if you like it in a reading format, I link to the videos as it becomes available at joshuami.com. You'll have to look through my archives because I think I posted a year or so back the last time.
Yeah, there's a link to it in the program.
Yeah.
This is also recorded, so you can just watch it on YouTube when it's done.
Yeah, and I'll update the blog post to have a link to the recording because I always like to keep plugging that away too. So thank you, everybody. And I do have some cards up here if anybody wants one. Feel free to grab one. Thank you.